each new day He will make a way. He will make a way.
Today is the fourth and last message of this series on the four great fruits of the Spirit. And these fruits are the fruits that we need to manifest in our Christian living here on earth so people can see the presence of the Spirit in our lives. We have talked about the spirit of patience, forbearance, and endurance. We've talked about the spirit of self-control, having a self that's controlled by God. And we've talked about the spirit of kindness, doing unto others as you would have them to do unto you. But today, the last one, I think in some ways is the most important one, because without this one, well, it's hard to do the others actually. And the one we have today is faithfulness, the fruit of faithfulness. But, of course, as it is with much in the Scriptures, we must ask the question, what is faithfulness? What does it mean? What does it mean to have the fruit of faithfulness? It's an important thought. You know, announced earlier this morning that flowers here are in memory of Grace, who is a dog, in case you don't know that. It's not that we're going to the dogs. But you know, it reminded me of a story that I was told many years ago. In my family gathering, we had this story. One of our grandmothers of my father, who was much older than my generation, lived way out in the country, and her husband died early. And she had nobody there but a dog to stay with her. And the name of the dog was Fetch. That was the dog's name, Fetch. And the story goes that when she got ready to cook and she needed some protein or some meat for her meal, she would go out to the back porch and she would call Fetch to come out of the forest, and he would come out. And if she needed just a small thing, like a squirrel or a rabbit or something of that nature, she would get just a little board about that big, and she would set it out there on the porch. And Fetch would look at it, and he'd go off into the forest. And in about an hour or two later, he would come back with a rabbit or a squirrel in his mouth and drop it on the porch. Kind of the earliest form of food delivery, I guess. But if she needed something a little bigger, like some guests were coming over and she needed a raccoon, or she needed something a little more size to it, like a possum or something, she had another board that was a little bigger, about this big, and she'd set that out on the porch. And of course call Fetch over, and he'd sniff at it and look at it. He'd go off into the forest, and sure enough, he'd come back a little bit later, and he might have a raccoon that he had killed and brought back, or he might have a possum that he had caught, and he'd leave it there. So Fetch was very faithful to her. He was very loyal to her. Whatever she asked of him, that's what he would do. But an accident happened one day. Accidentally, she had been ironing, and she set the ironing board out on the porch. And old Fetch, he looked at that ironing board. And off into the forest he went. And the sad thing is, he hasn't come back yet. But he was faithful. Whatever was required, that's what he went. Even if it was a huge thing or a small thing. He was faithful to his master. And that is my best idea of how we can define faithfulness. Faithfulness is doing all that is required of you by the God that loves you and the God in which you believe. Now, that's faithfulness. It's loyalty. It's loyalty to God in our Christian faith. That's faithfulness, whatever He requires. But now comes the second question. Why? Why are we faithful? You see, if you don't understand what faithfulness is, well, you're in pretty bad shape. But if you understand what it is, but you don't know why you must be faithful, then it's hard to have the spirit of faithfulness if you don't understand why. And so today I'd like to share with you some ideas that come from our scriptures about three key understandings that we need to have about God and who God is that enable us to trust God and no other thing, person, or God. That enable us to know that we are putting our trust in the only thing we can trust. In the Gringo Post this week, I put a little article inviting people to come here and worship with us, and the title of the article was, "Who Can You Trust These Days?" Well, there's only one, and that's God. That's the only thing you can really, really trust today. So I'd like to look at three of these key thoughts that you need to have in your life if you don't have them already. And if you do have them, you need to remember them and go over them until you really got them down. Because these are the kinds of thoughts you need to have if you're going to have the fruit of faithfulness. They all help you to understand why you are so faithful to the one and only God that you have. Now, the first one is simply stated this way. We are faithful to God because we remember His victories in our life. You see? We are faithful to God because nobody has been more victorious in our life than God. God has helped us to overcome things that we thought we never could overcome. God has helped us to get through things that we never thought we could get through. God has made a way when we thought there was no way that could be made. We remember the successes, and that's why we put our trust in God. When I was a young boy, my father dreamed that I would become a mechanic. Well, that's father's dreams, isn't it? I did not become a mechanic. But anyway, he loved to work on cars. And in those days, you had to work on your own car because either a mechanic was so expensive it was hard to pay for it. But all the people that owned cars, men generally, they knew how to fix a car because in those days a car was so simple you could fix something on it. You don't even know how it works. But my job, when my father got to start working on his car and jacked it up from underneath, and he had to get up under there to work on things, my job was to give him the tools that he needed. Give me this wrench, give me that pliers, whatever. So I would sit there. I was just a young little boy. And I'd hand him under there, and I'd give it to him. And he would fix on it, and every now and then he would, the wrench would slip, and he would say something he shouldn't say. And he said, "Don't you say that, boy. Don't you ever say that." But one time there was something wrong with the car. I don't remember what it was. It was something up at the top of the carburetor and all that. And he worked on it, couldn't get it fixed. And so a little bit later on, he said, "We're gonna have to take this car to Old Joe." Now I'd heard about Old Joe, but I didn't know why we had to take it to Old Joe. But anyway, got a tow truck, come out, put the car on the tow truck, and we got inside and we took off. And we lived in Irving, Texas at that time, and you had to go all the way through Irving and all the way out to Arlington and all the way on out to past DeSoto and Duncanville and all the way out there. Long, long trip. And I had to ask my dad. I said, "Dad, there's got to be somebody closer. Why do we have to take it to Old Joe?" And he looked at me with one of the most serious looks he's ever looked at me, and he said, "Boy, if Old Joe can't fix it, it can't be fixed." I remember that about Old Joe. And he did fix it, and he always seemed to fix it. Whatever it was, he knew how to fix it. And that's the point. This is why we put our trust in God. whatever is wrong with our heart, whatever is wrong with our soul, whatever is wrong with our mind, God can fix it. Because God knows what it is that's really causing us the troubles that we have. We think it's this or that, and we think so superficially that we have no idea what it's really all about. But God sees into the situation, and He knows what is wrong with you, and He knows what it is you're not doing that you should be doing, and He knows what you're doing that you should not be doing. God knows all of those things. And so, if you're going to trust some source of wisdom, if you're going to trust somebody in this world, if you're going to be faithful and loyal to some source of wisdom, guidance, and understanding, who are you going to choose? Well, there's a lot of people out there that think they know what's wrong with you, and there's a lot of people out there that offer their advice, oh, you need to do this, oh, you need to do that. And all those people can be helpful in some ways, but only when God justifies it, only when God says amen to it, is it what you need to do. So, this is the first and greatest, in some ways, the greatest reason why we have this faithfulness to God. And the more we have this thought in our head that only God can fix it, meaning that, of course, through all the instruments He has doctors to help Him, He has medicines to use, He has all kinds of things that God can use. He has all kinds of experiences He can bring you to, and He has circumstances He can put you through. He's got a lot of stuff to work with, but it's God that's working with it. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. It's God that's working with it. So that's why we trust God. That's why we have this spirit of being faithful to God, because we know if He can't fix it, it can't be fixed, and He can fix everything that there is, you see. That's the right attitude. And if you have that attitude, and anytime you have a trouble, a trial, a temptation, whatever comes your way, your first thought should be, we got to go to old Joe. It's time to go to God. It's time to get this problem before the Lord before it's too late. That's your first thought. And if you have that thought, let me tell you, your faithfulness will grow and grow and grow. And pretty soon you won't even have to think about it. It will just be an automatic response. We got to go to God with this issue. We got to go right now. So that's the first thought I'd share with you today, that if you want to grow your faithfulness, you want to grow the fruit of faithfulness, practice being a person that believes the first thing, not the last thing, but the first thing you need to do with all your trials, tribulations, troubles, even joys as well, is you need to take it to God and let God's opinion be made known. That's the first thought. Now, the second thought I have here today is that you need to realize this truth about God. And this truth is, God has never failed you. God has never failed to give you what you need. Yes, you can look at the successes, and that's good, the victories. But remember the fact that God has never failed you. God has never sent back a message in prayer and says, well, that's a really hard one. I don't know what to do about it. Sorry. That's not how God answers prayer. God answers prayer with what needs to be known. God answers prayer with what needs to be shown. You see? Yeah, God has never failed me, and I'm pretty sure if you go back and analyze your own life, you may not even realize it was God that was at work in your life at the time. But hopefully you have finally realized that that situation you went through, or that circumstance that you had to face, that was God at work in your life, and it was exactly what you needed at the time. Maybe you didn't understand that at the time. Maybe you had no idea this is what was going on. But if you now look back on it, if you now reflect upon it, you begin to understand, oh, that was God at work in my life, and God really has never failed me, and much of the time I haven't even paid attention to what He's doing. But the fact of the matter is, God has never failed me. You see, this is an idea that you need to have in your mind. Because if you understand that God has never failed to meet your needs, then you understand why you turn to God with your needs, whatever they might be. You see? It's the fact that if you're going to have happen to you what needs to happen to you, if you're going to experience what you need to experience, if you're going to receive what you need to receive, it's God that's going to give it to you. So it's like they say, you know, take it to the Lord in prayer. Because when you do that, the need is met. But you got to remember that. You got to remember that God never fails to meet your needs. And that's why you're faithful to God. You see? When I was a young boy, growing up in Texas, of course, my family was from East Texas. And we would go back occasionally to visit my father's relatives. He had several sisters and brothers, and they all lived in East Texas. And we would go back occasionally to visit with them. And I always enjoyed it because we got to play with the farm animals. We got to go pick corn. It was always a nice thing to do, and I enjoyed it a lot. But one time we went down there, and I caught a really bad cold. We went in July, and it's a little bit hot in Texas in July. And then I got cool, and then I got a cold, and I didn't feel too good. So my father and my uncle, which was his older brother, who was, I don't know where they got these names. His name was Pud. I have no idea. I never heard anybody named Pud ever since. But he was Uncle Pud. And he was married to a woman who was Aunt Eula May. Eula May and Pud. I remember those names quite well. But anyway, they were going into town to look at a tractor or something. I forget what it was. And I was kind of sad that I couldn't go with them. But I had this cold. I was kind of sneezing. And so Aunt Eula May had invited some other of the neighbor women in that area to come over for some refreshments. And of course, I was lying over on the couch, not really lying down, just sitting over there with a little blanket on. And so I got to listen to the women talk for about 3 or 4 hours. But I remember part of that conversation, and it stuck with me ever since. One of the women who knew what my uncle was like, and he had just been there, they left not long before that. They just left. And my uncle had this bad habit of chewing tobacco. And he liked to spit it wherever he wanted to spit it. And it was really kind of gross for me. But that's how they did it in East Texas in those days. And he seldom shaved. And he was kind of a grungy looking old man chewing tobacco and spitting it on the porch and all that. So one of the women asked Aunt Eula May, after he'd gone and everything, she said, "Eula May, why did you put up with that man? You know, he spits tobacco, he doesn't shave, he's ugly. What are you going to say?" And I remember her, she pointed out to the front yard area of this house, and there was a mangy old dog out there. And she pointed to that dog out there, and she said to the women, "You see that old mangy dog out there?" And everybody said, "Yeah, we saw that." Well, that's good stuff. That's what they named that dog, good stuff. Because Uncle Pud said he's got the good stuff. And she said he may not look like much, but he's a strong dog and he's a mean dog. And she said, "Now listen, in the nighttime when I hear those wolves howling out there in the woods, there ain't no dog I would rather have in my front yard than that dog." She said, because he's got the good stuff. And so she said, that's why I stay with Pud, is because he's never failed to meet my needs. He may be grungy, he may be a mess, and he may be something that people would wonder why I stay with him, but he's never failed me. That's what she said. I remember hearing that. I was only about 10 years old, but I thought, well, that's what a woman likes, is a man that never fails her. Learned that. But the thought was that it's the same way with our spiritual life. Some people say, why do you put up with God? Look what bad things have happened to you. Why do you keep being faithful to God? What good's it done you? Why do you go down there to that church? A bunch of hypocrites anyway. Why do you do that? What's that all about? You see, it's about God. It's not about the church, and it's not about Christianity. It's about your relationship with God, and it's the God who's never failed you and never will fail you. And the world may not understand why you put up with God. The world may not understand why you keep going back to God. But we understand we keep going back to God because nobody meets our needs the way God meets our needs. So, there it is. That's the second thought that we need to keep in mind if we're going to grow our sense of faithfulness. You see, you get into a kind of a rut or a routine, and you just kind of go to church and you kind of go home and you kind of just don't think about it for the next 6 days or whatever. Don't be like that. Wake up and remember why you're coming down here to this place. It's not just to listen to me, and it's not just to sing the hymns and to read the scriptures. You're coming down here because this place represents your willingness to be faithful to God because God has been faithful to you. So, if He needs you to show up here, you show up here. Because that's the kind of God you have, is the one who, if you need this, then you have this. You see, that's the kind of relationship we have. And we got to remember that that's the kind of God we have. And we got to remember that that's why we're faithful to God. And we got to remember that's why we come here. And that's why we read our scriptures or read our prayers at home. So that's why we say a prayer ourselves. Because we are aware of the truth that God will always meet our needs and always will. And we don't want to be so embarrassed that God might say, well, I haven't seen you in a long time. No, we want to be present with God every day, 7 days a week, for as long as we are awake. So that's the second thought. Then the last thought I have for you today is that we understand in life that all kinds of difficulties occur. And we understand, if we are wise, that we make mistakes. Now, some people may believe they never make a mistake, but they'll find out, if they haven't found out already, that to be human is to make mistakes. To err is human. Yeah, we do that all the time. And those mistakes cost us money. They cost us pain in the emotional area. They cost us pain in the soul. These mistakes that we either on purpose do or by accident do, they hurt our life, and they hurt us in all kinds of ways. And that's just life. That's just the way it is. We don't go through life mistake-free, you know. We go through life full of mistakes. Myself, you, everyone. We all do that. So, what does that have to do with faithfulness? What does that have to do with our faithfulness growing? Well, what it has to do with it is this. Nobody in this universe or any other universe can pick up the pieces of our life and get us moving again than God. It's the only one that can do that. We need somebody in this life that can pick up the pieces. We need somebody in this life that can get us moving on. Because otherwise we'll just fall into a big heap of tears and that'll be the end of us. We need someone to pick us up. We need someone to take us forward. And this is what God can do for us. I know He's done it for me so many times. I cannot even count how many times this has been the case, where there has been mistakes made, there has been errors accomplished. And from that, I have had to be picked up by God and literally carried forward. You know, there's that famous little saying about the footprints of Jesus, you know, and you see Jesus in your footprint and He's going down the beach together, and then all of a sudden it's only Jesus' footprints, and somebody says, well, what happened? And you say, well, that's the time that He carried me. And this is another and final great thought we need to think if we are going to increase our faith. That's what I'm trying to get across here, is the idea of increasing our faithfulness. And to do that, we need to understand why we are so faithful to God. And if we understand who God is and what God's done for us, then we can have a much better chance of being more faithful and more faithful and more faithful. Because only God can fix the situations we have. Only God can meet our needs. And then finally, only God can pick up the broken pieces of our life and get us to moving again. Or to put it another way, a biblical way, and that is to say only God can relieve our paralysis. You know, sometimes we're like this paralyzed man and we cannot move anymore because we are so brokenhearted or because we're so broken-minded. And Jesus says, take your pallet, rise up and walk. You see, this can be done for us. And that's what Jesus does for us. That's what God does for us. That's what the Holy Spirit does for us. It gets us moving again. Again, I go back to my childhood. I guess they say the older you get, the more you remember your childhood. And that's true for me. But I go back now to a time when, I guess again, I was about 7 or 8 years old. And it's another aunt story. I had another aunt. This was my mother's sister. And her name was Alta. And she was Aunt Alta. It was a more decent sounding name than the other aunts. Yeah. But anyway, my mother had gotten sick. She had cancer, and for about 5 years she suffered. So my aunt lived not too far away from us, and so she would come over whenever she could, sometimes at night to cook supper, or come over on the weekends to cook, and to help out with me, I guess, and my father. And she was so sweet about that, and she had this great loving spirit and would really cheer us up when she came if we were down because of certain things that had happened to my mother at that time. And so anyway, one time she came over and she knew that I loved her coconut cream pie. She could make the best coconut cream pie of anybody I knew. And it had this meringue on top of it that was so nice and a little crispy brown on top. And so she said to me, you know, would you like to make a coconut meringue pie today? And, you know, you almost wanted to answer like, well, is the Pope Catholic? Is a pig's tail curly? Yes, I want to make a coconut meringue pie today. And so she showed me how to do it, and I remember all the way it was mixed together and everything, and it looked like a total mess, and didn't know how it was going to turn out to be so delicious. And she rolled out the crust, and handmade crust and all that. And when it came time, she had this Pyrex dish. It was made out of glass. And she brought it over to the counter, and well, she handed it to me, I think it was, and she said, put that on the counter. She said, be careful, it's glass. I said, oh, I'll put it on the counter, so I put it there. And then she poured all the stuff in on top of the crust, and she got it all filled up, and she had the meringue making someplace, and then she put that all in the oven, and it baked for a little while. And of course, I kind of sat there at the dining room table and looked at the oven. Just could not wait for that delicious coconut cream pie to come out of the oven. And of course, she looked in occasionally, and she said, you know, I think it's about done. You want to take it out and move it over to the counter? And I said, sure. So I got those little things you put on your hands. And I went in there, and I got the pie, and I was sliding it out. And somehow, the thing I was holding it with over here fell out of my hand, so I was holding this hot Pyrex dish with my bare hand, and you know what happened? That pie just crushed into the middle of the floor, and you couldn't even eat it because it had all this broken glass in it. Oh, I can still see it to this day. But I remember my aunt saying, that's all right, honey, we can make another one. Oh, you know, I was just devastated by the mistake I had made. I was devastated by what I had lost out of. But that was the way she was. She had that spirit of forgiveness. Now, if it had been my father that was there, I would be condemned for many days. Never allowed in the kitchen again. But my aunt was there, and I can still remember her voice. That's all right, honey. And she said that a lot of times. I had a lot of other things that went on. She would have to say, that's all right, honey. It's another way of saying your sins are forgiven. That's all right, honey. It's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. We can always make another pie, you see. And that's what you got to remember about God. God is the one that does that. He is the one that enables us to understand. Yeah, we have guilt. Yeah, we got remorse. Yeah, we say, oh, how stupid, stupid, stupid. Yeah, we got all those emotions and we got all those things. But God will not let us be paralyzed by them. God will not keep us asleep because of them. God will wake us up and say to us, it's all right, honey, you are forgiven. Let's get going now. Take up your mat and walk. It's time to move on to the next day and the next thing, because it's all going to be okay, you see. This is the kind of God we have, and it's remembering that that's the kind of God we have that enables you to be faithful to that kind of God, you see, because you're going to have mistakes. You're going to drop pies all day long, all the time, and you're going to need somebody to say to you, that's all right, honey, come on, get up, let's go on. You're going to need that, and you know that's who God is, and you know that that's what He provides for you in your life, that forgiveness, and you can receive it and be made new by it, and you can rise up and walk again, you see. That's what you know. Who wouldn't be faithful to a God like that? You would be hurting yourself not to be faithful to a God like that. Because if you're a person that makes mistakes and has all these troubles like every other human being does, and you say, oh, I don't need God, I don't even know who God is, you're making a big, big mistake. Because the fact is that it is God and only this one God of the great Spirit of all the universe that can help you pick up your pieces and move on down the road in your life. So then those are the three things I want to share with you today that you can keep in your mind to enable you to grow your faithfulness. Because sometimes our faithfulness is not very strong. We get tempted. Oh, I think I will do this today. Oh, I think I'll worship this God today. A different God, a different idea. Oh, I think I'll just take care of my own life today. I think I'll just do what I want to do. We get all these kind of temptations. But the more you work through these things, and remember that if God can't fix it, it can't be fixed. And if you remember that God always provides our needs, and if you remember that nobody can pick up the pieces of our life and move us on like God can, if you remember those three things, you will grow your faithfulness. And you will see how important it is for you every day of the week, 7 days a week, to be thinking about the God that's walking with you, to be thinking about your relationship with that God, and to be so thankful with gratitude that this is the God you walk with, you see. Well, for those of you who don't know it, I am from Texas. Everybody knows that. Born in Texas, raised in Texas, and now I live in what we call South Texas. That's Ecuador, by the way. We've already kind of taken it over in Texas. It's our place. Yeah, but when you go to Texas and then you go to the University of Texas, as I did for my undergraduate degrees, you know about football. That's the great thing we learn in Texas is football. And the Texas Longhorns and all their great career. Now, back when I was in Austin and going to Texas, Texas was a powerhouse of football in the United States, and they had a rival very nearby called Oklahoma. And so there were these great football games between Texas and Oklahoma to see who would be the best football player.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, of course. We got one person from Oklahoma. We can just be quiet. But that year, I forget which it was, but they were playing each other. The Longhorns and Oklahoma was playing each other for the national championship. And they had a coach by the name of Darrell Royal. And he was quite a coach and did a pretty good job. But Oklahoma had a tremendous team that year. They had developed a type of play called the triple option that was really, really difficult to defend against. And Texas was not knowing for sure if they were going to be able to defend against Oklahoma like that. And So the sportscasters were worried for Texas. Oklahoma may defeat you with that special new offense they have. And so they were having a press conference with Darrell Royal, and they were asking him, are you going to change your offense? Are you going to put in some different special kind of players? What are you going to do to overcome that Oklahoma offense that they've got now? What new thing are you going to do? And it was a famous story on the news. He looked at him and he said, well, in Texas we learned that you got to dance with who brung you. And that means that he was not going to change a thing. He said, my team has got us this far, and we're going to play exactly the same way we've always played. You've got to dance with who brought you to the dance. And that famous saying went all over the world, and people today know that saying, that you got to dance with who brung you to the dance. That's the only right thing to do. And especially spiritually, is it the only right thing to do? Because who got us to this dance called life? Who brought us? God brought us here. That's who brought us. And we can think, oh, I'm going to dance with this one, I'm going to dance with that one, I'm going to go out here and have a good time with this one. But you got to dance with who brought you. Because you owe it to them. Because they're the ones that knew what you might enjoy in life and how you could have even more joy in life than you ever had before. So the idea then is for us, if we're going to increase our faithfulness, is we got to realize who brought us to this dance called life. And it's God who brought us to this dance, which we call life. And it is God who is able to fix whatever is broken inside of us. It is God who will give us whatever it is that we need. And it is God who will pick up the pieces and clean up the mess and get us moving again. That's how we build our faithfulness. Amen. Let us receive now our benediction. And may now you go forth into this world fully convinced that there is only one God, and that one God gives you all that you need, forgives all that is broken in your life, and brings you in the final name of Jesus to the place of the kingdom. Amen.